Hello guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking into how to work with a Firebase NoSQL database from Google, how to interact with it, how to start it out, how to set it up actually from the beginning, use its basic configurations, and how to get a few data points going into the database, out of the database, how to retrieve them. And it's a very cool tool because actually Firebase itself has an amazing authentication management process, which means you can very easily set up a database for your application, specifically in this case in Python, and you can log into it and you can force your users to only be able to retrieve certain types of information or any type of information if you even want it to be so, only if they specifically register into your database. So they need an email to register, and they will get back a verification email. And unless they are verified, they cannot log in, they cannot read certain types of information. You can set up all of that in the Firebase rules. So we're going to go through a bit of that, and hopefully you will enjoy it. Let's get into it. So in this case, I will leave the links to documentation somewhere around here. So you can go look up how Firebase works, what it is, how to set it up. And I will try to show you in this Google Colab Notebook, which I will also leave the link in the description below, which means you can essentially open this Colab Notebook and you can execute the code along as I go. So in every line that I'm executing, you can do it along me. It's very good. Google Colab is fantastic. Actually, most of the Google tools really are fantastic and very user-friendly. And it's very easy to learn Python with it because it requires no installation of anything. You don't need an integrated development environment. You don't need to install Python. You don't need to install Jupyter Notebooks or Anaconda or anything at all. You just need a Gmail account. You open Google Colab. You start a new notebook, or you copy my notebook if you want, and you can get straight up coding and learning Python. So let's see how this would work with Firebase. So to start up, you would go to the Firebase console. So this is essentially, if you Google it, it's just Google Colab, and it's the first thing that pops up. It's Google Collaboratory. Here, as you can see, I have a bunch of Colab notebooks already working. The one we are specifically going to look into is this one here, which I have open already. And to open Firebase, it's the same. So Google Firebase, we would Google that. Here, Firebase, you can launch it up. And straight up, you have an account. You can get started. So you can see the videos, do a little demo. You can see what they talk about it. Firebase essentially has two different databases. They have the one that we are going to be looking into is a real-time database, which is another fantastic quality of this database. You don't have to do any push or pull requests from data through the API to actually read it. Everything that you do is live. So whenever you change something, the next person that would get into, imagine that you have a set of data that is accessible without authentication, and you have a website that uses that data. Whenever you update something, the next person can see it immediately without any pull. It's linked live to the database itself. And we will see how that works when we are pushing some information into it and creating some new users. In this case, I would go to my Firebase profile, to my console rather, sorry. And here I have already one set up for FoxyFi, which is the website that I've built in Python, completely built in Dash and using Firebase as a database. So we would just, to show you quickly, this would be foxyfi.cc. This is the website that is fully built in Dash in Python. And it uses Firefox. It uses Firebase as a database for stuff that is stored, for example, in this specific database here, or anything related to user creations, for example, any information about a user. You go here, the badges that they have, the score, etc. Everything is stored in a Firebase database. In our case, we're going to set up a new project so that I can show you how this would work. We will call it, I don't know, showcase. And I confirm here. That will do it. We can enable Google Analytics. That is fine. We can select an account, default account for Firebase, and we would create a project. This will take a few seconds. So once it's set up, it'll show you here, your database is fully set up. You have a nice little navigation bar with a bunch of tools. A lot of them we're not going to go over. It's quite complicated. There's a lot of different complex things that you can do with this. We're going to go only into the basics as an intro. And what we want to look at it initially is authentication. So how do I get started? You can go in here, and here you could have already the documentation of how Firebase works as a whole, what you can set up for Android, Flutter. So a lot of Flutter apps are actually using Firebase on the back end as well, because it's so versatile and so easy to set up, and the authentication mechanism is so good that creating logins and for users is really, really simple. How does authentication work? You can see you have different types of authentication in the documentation. We could see here, where do I start, I believe. You can use Google, you can use Facebook, you could use an Apple ID, play games, GitHub, Microsoft, Twitter. You could have any kind of authentication method you could use, or plain email address and password, which is what I'm going to show you how to do here in this specific scenario. So when we go, let's say, get started, and in here we are going to enable email and password. Yes, emailing passwordless sign in. We're not going to enable this. We're going to save that. So that gives us our authentication method. So you have to set this up before you start, because some sort of authentication method has to be set up for this database. Now you can go to users. As you can see, we have absolutely no users. Templates would be, you can set up the templates for when verification emails are sent, or password resets emails are sent, or email address changes are sent. So you can, all this is set up on the back end. So you can use simple lines of code and pass in certain types of information, like an email of a user, and it will automatically send him an email reset, an email address change email, or a password reset email, or an email verification email. Even SMS verification you could set up through here. And if you have a host and an SSL certification and a domain, you could even set up your domain and all the certificates in here. And in this case, instead of showcase, which is the name of our application, .firebase.com, you would have no reply at yourapplication.com, or whatever your domain would be in this case. All right, we have set that up. Next thing we want to go into is, as you can see, there's a Firestore database, which is their larger type of database that they have. That's not the one we're using. We're using the real-time database. So we're going to go into that. And we're going to go straight into create database. And here you can select where you want it to be hosted. So obviously this would be more, if your users are all more in Asia or more in the US, you could potentially select one of these cases to just to speed up the access to the servers. In my case, I'm in Europe, so I'm going to set it up in Europe. And we're going to start in locked mode, or you can start in test mode, which would allow anything to be read and written to the database. What we are going to do is we're going to start it in locked mode, and I am going to edit this to some extent. Yeah, so we're going to enable that. And there we go. And here, as you can see on the rules, it will have set up the rules for the database based on whether we set a test mode or locked mode. And you can actually edit this. You can go to rules playground, or you can actually just, you could edit this here straight up from. So what we are going to do, we're going to change the rules a little bit. So we are going to set this here, and here we're going to say users, and we're going to set up a new dictionary, right? Where we are going to cut this and place this in here. And we're going to say read is equal to true, because we're going to allow every user to read the database, regardless of whether he's authenticated or not. But we are not going to want them to write to the database if they're not authenticated. In this case, if it's false, nobody can ever write to this database. In this case, the user's child of the database would not be accessible for writing purposes. What we are going to do is we're going to change that. We're going to make that only authenticated users that have registered onto your database as a user with an email and a password and that they verified that email and password are able to write to the database. So to do that, we're going to write a string, and we're going to say auth has to be different from null. Okay? And this will allow users essentially to read and write to your database. All right, to do that, we're going to publish this. So the rules have been published, means they are accepted. Google does check them to see if that actually would work, whatever you're setting up. So that is done. And as you can see, we have absolutely no data. So what we're going to do here is we could create a child right now, and we can just call it users. Add, and that's it. Yeah, so we'll have an empty child called users. Now what we need to do is we need to get the configuration to set up the link to our Firebase database. And to get that, we need to set up an application, a new application that is linked and can access this database. To do that, you go to project settings, you go to the bottom. Here you have different options if you're developing on iOS or on Flutter for Android. In our case, we're going to do this. We're going to call it Showcase App. Also set up Firebase hosting. No, we're not going to do that. Register this app. There we go. And here we have the keys, yeah? So this, we're going to copy this. And we're going to come over here. And just for you to see, it is exactly, it has exactly everything that we need, yes? The API key, the auth domain, the database URL is here on the bottom in this case, the project ID, storage bucket, message sending ID, app ID, measurement, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this, or rather, we're going to delete this line here. We're going to delete all of this, paste this in here, select this and align it up. And here what we're going to do is obviously it's a dictionary, so we have to convert these back to their string versions. App ID and measurement ID. So to launch Firebase and to access our database through Google Colab, we need to first install the package that is called Pyrebase, which is a nice Python library that allows us to access this specific Firebase database. So to do that, you just do pip pip install Pyrebase. In this case, it's initializing the Google Colab Notebook, and it's going to now install the library. Done. Now it's run. It found Pyrebase and it ran Pyrebase. It's quite a large library and has quite a few libraries in it. As you can see, Firebase, Python, GWT, PyCryptodome, OAuth client, gcloud requests, etc. There's quite a lot of libraries that are used in order for Pyrebase to launch successfully. Now, in this case, I'm going to set up my email. This is one of my many test emails that I have, so don't bother copying it or spamming it. It's just a crappy email where I send everything to the spam inbox and a random password. We're going to start up Firebase by saying our Firebase is going to be equal to the Pyrebase library initialize app, and we're going to pass our configuration dictionary that we just set up into this. And we're going to say that our auth method is equal to our Firebase method our Firebase variable that we just set up, .auth. And that our database is going to be firebase.database. So let's see if this executes correctly. This did. It accessed the database. Perfect. And now what we can do is we can call our auth method, and we can say auth create user with email and password, which is one of the functions that auth has. And we're going to pass in our email and password. So what we're expecting from here is now if we go back to our project and to authentication, there are no users here, so we should see a user pop up at this stage. So if we execute this, there we go. It successfully says it accessed the database and set up a user under this email with this ID token, this kind and local ID, and a refresh token ID, which allows you to refresh these ID tokens because they only last for an hour, which is a comment I actually put down here. The user ID tokens expire after an hour, so you need to be able to refresh them. This is only for security reasons to avoid the tokens being stolen, so there's no infinite running tokens on your database. So if we go back to the database and we refresh this, we can see now a user has been set up in this database. Created today, signed in today, and has this user UID. Okay? The next big thing we can do is we can save our authentication token, which we will use quite often to be able to access certain specifications of our user, into an auth token variable. To that, we say auth token is equal to auth.sign in with email and password, because it makes you re-sign in and would save all these details, or in this case, that will be returned into auth token, so that you can actually access the ID token and the refresh token and make sure whether the user is registered or not. So we will execute that, and as you can see, it returns I'm registered and an ID token, and which we now will save the token ID. So we'll access, this is a dictionary, we will access the key ID token and return its value so that we can store it into token ID. So we'll say token ID is equal to our auth token at the key ID token, and that will store the value into this variable. We need to pass this variable quite often, because if we need to be authenticated to write, for example, to our database, which is what we set up in the rules, this is the only way for you to access through Python this database and write to it. Because if you don't pass an ID token, which is only generated when you sign in, that means that you're authenticated effectively, you will not be able to write to this database. So let's save that. This would be the way you would refresh tokens. So you'd say token ID is equal to auth refresh, and you will pass in the refresh token key from auth token that we stored here. So as you can see, auth token has a refresh token key, which has a value, and you would pass this value into it, and it will automatically refresh that, so that it no longer has a 1 hour expiration code, but it refreshes that expiration to last an additional hour. So if you were building something, an application or a web application, which requires users to be on it for quite a while, I would suggest in certain parts of your code that you implement certain circular checks in order to make sure that the token is refreshed to some extent and renewed, in order for the user to keep being logged in without being kicked out and having to re-log in into your application. So another thing we can do is we can send email verifications directly with Firebase to our email addresses, or to the user's email address that is registering. To do that, we just have to call the auth method that we stored above, and we can say auth.send email verification and pass in our token ID, and that will automatically send us an email. I already have my inbox open. As you can see, it's empty. I have spam set up here because I'm pretty sure this will go into our spam inbox because there's no SSL certificate and there is no domain set up with this application. So quite often it might be the case that these emails end up in spam. So if you're testing it out on your end, you might have to go into the spam folder to make sure that you find the email. So in this case, we would execute this. It returned a successful return for our email address, and it sent us an identity toolkit with a positive confirmation response. And if we go into our inbox, if I refresh this now, there is a spam email, and there we go. Verify your project. It sends you this email where you could come here and you could click on this address, and it will say your email has been verified. So if we come here and we return information on the account, so you can use auth.getAccountInfo and pass in the token ID. This will return all the information for the account set up in your database. And you can see that it has a section where it says email verified, and that now says true. It would have said false if we would not have clicked on that link before. This also returns the information such as your user credentials, the email, the last login with the last refresh for the token, your local ID, the password hash that you've stored. In this case, this is the hash for this password here. The last time your password was updated, user info, etc. A lot of this tiny bits of information that you could store or could use to run some statistics on your web application if you have a large user base. It's again another dictionary. You just access the kind or the user's key, and inside you have different keys, or in this case you have a list of keys, and you can access the different items just by accessing those lists. Here, if you want to check if the account was verified in this case, if you want to have that as a return for your web application, all you would have to do is, in this case, to access the users and email verified true parameter or value in this case. You can call your auth method and say auth.getAccountInfo, just like above, pass your token ID, and then we'll go into our child users. And there we want the first item on the list, because this is, as you can see, where does this end? This ends here. Right, this is actually only one item, so it's the first item on the list. And inside this first item of the list, you have a dictionary, which is returned as this item of the list. And in this dictionary, you have one key, two keys, and a third key, which is email verified. So we call email verified. And if we execute that, it will return true, which is what is stored in this dictionary right now. The same you could say if you want to call the last refresh to understand whether if you had some time-based rules to refresh the tokens, you can access this wrong one here, refresh through here, and you can convert this to a datetime value. And you could then use that to identify whether or not it's time to refresh your token. You can also send password reset emails. So in case you forgot your password and you want to create that ability for the user to reset their password in your web application, the function that you need to use is to call the auth method and call send password reset email, and you would pass in the user email. Here, the email we set up at the top, at the beginning, as you remember. Here, email is my email. And in this case, if we execute this, it returns a successful response. It sent an email to this email. And if we go to our email now and click on our spam folder, there you go. Reset your password. And you could click this link and it will open a little box and will ask you for a new password where you can save. Yeah. So if we now wanted to access our database and start writing new entries to our database, so remember, we created this empty child users, and imagine we want to start adding users to this child, yes? The way we would do that is we would call upon our DB instantiation. So if you remember, we instantiated that here. DB is Firebase.database, and we are currently authenticated. So based on the rules that we set up for our database here, we are allowed to write to this database, provided that our auth is not null, right? So what we will do is we will create, in this case, I created this random dictionary, just called it new user, given some random information like username, random username, birthday is this date, age is 32 based on this date, bio is I'm a new user, and email is just a random email. So it's just random key value pairs in this dictionary that we're going to pass in. And if we wanted to send this to our database under a child called random username, so inside our child users, we would create a child called random username that currently does not exist. And in here, we would set our dictionary to this random username. So we would say db.child, call the user's child that we created. Inside here, we will create a random username child, which if it does not already exist, it will create automatically like this. And we will set this to our new user dictionary. And we would have to pass in our token ID, again, because we only have the rights to write to it if we are authenticated, and this is the only way for it to know. So if you would imagine if we execute it like this without the token, it will say permission denied. But if we go back and execute it with the token, there we go. it has successfully executed this code and returned this. Yeah, and if we go to our database, you can see random username has been created, and in here has the 5 random variables that we've passed in from our new user dictionary. Next, let's create another user. Let's say the username will be FoxyFi, and let's say the new user will be the same as above, but instead of giving it the username, we'll pass in username FoxyFi here, just so that we can create a child which has this username, and then pass that also inside the dictionary. Just to give you a different random example, yes? So the new user in this case would be username which is FoxyFi, birthday would be the same, age the same, bio would be the same, and the email would be equal to the email that we have created our account with. Remember, I've declared that at the very beginning here. Here, email. This would be the email. And in this case, we are passing in both the email and the username as external variables. And the same way we would call db child, our user child that we created. We would pass in our username so that we would create a child within users based on our username, which would be FoxyFi in this case. And again, we would use a set method and say set this child to the new user dictionary, and we would pass in the token ID to make sure that we are authenticated. And there we go, it correctly passed in that, and it's created a new user called FoxyFi, and with the relevant information that we passed on to it. If we wanted to remove one of these users, so let's say we want to remove the random username we've created earlier. To do that, we can just say db.child users child random username, right? So it's our database users random username dot remove, and we pass in our token ID because again, to write and in this case erase an entry, we need to be authenticated as well. So we would create that as executed. So if we go back, it is in red and it disappeared. There we go. That's how you would remove a user. If we wanted to access a specific type of data from one of the users, so in this case, let's say we want to access our username FoxyFi that we just created before, we could say db child users go to user username, so to child FoxyFi, and update. Let's say we want to update bio to a different bio. Yeah. So we had a bio, I'm a new user, and we want the new bio to be this is a new bio now. So as you can see, FoxyFi has its bio as I'm a new user. And here, if this executes correctly, the bio should no longer be I'm a new user, but should be this is a new bio now. And we pass in the token ID again to write in an authenticated method. We execute this, it worked, and there you go. This is a new bio now. It wrote to that specific entry in our dictionary, FoxyFi. Another method you can create a user with, without using the set method above, is if we declared again a random dictionary, a new user. So a new user here would be another user, some random date for the birthday, age, bio, and email again. We could say instead of set, we'd say users.push. In this case, as you remember, before we said set, we created the child that we wanted for that username, and we said set that child to this dictionary, right? So instead of setting that child to this dictionary, we could use push, which will instead create a random generated ID for this child. So instead of having use a FoxyFi user inside users, we would have a random ID inside users. And inside that ID, you would have the information contained inside this dictionary. So if we execute this, as you can see, the name created inside users is this ID. And we should be able to see that now here. There we go. And inside there, we can see the random information from the dictionary that we created. So the push method will create random IDs, which is quite useful. For example, in FoxyFi's case, foxyfi.cc, where you have random trades, and each trade has an ID name. So if I click here, as you can see, the URL right now is just foxyfi.cc, but if I click on one of these trades, the URL path will be an ID. So this is how I target different IDs from the database and write to them, edit them, remove them, close them, open these trades, etc. It's a push method here for each trade that is added. So when you're logged in, you have the ability to add trades, and when you're adding new trades, and submit that will push and not set to the database, and that automatically creates a new ID for us. If we wanted to get all the values inside the database, so inside the user's child, we could just say users equals db.child users.get. That will get all the records inside the user's child. And we will just say users.val so that it shows every single value. Now let me show you what this does. This will show us an ordered dictionary, with this ID, which has this stuff inside, and this ID, FoxyFi, which has this stuff inside. So the two users, the one with the random ID and the one we created with the set method. But if I would remove the .val from here, it will return you an object type. So this is why we are using the .val method, so that it shows the value of users, and the value is always returned in this object as an ordered dictionary. If we wanted, in this case, to convert this into a normal dictionary to more easily access it, we could just say, with a quick a quick for loop, we could say for user in users.each, so in users.each, because users, again, is an ordered dictionary. We could print out the user key and print out the user value. So if we do that, as you can see, it printed out every key. So the keys in this case is this random ID and FoxyFi, and then the value that is correspondent to that key, which is the dictionaries that we have set for each of these values, or pushed in the case of this random ID. And if we wanted to convert this to a dictionary, we could just say that the convert dictionary is equal to dict, and inside dict we pass our users.val. And if we comment this out, here quickly, and say converted to dict, and we execute, it will return us a dictionary and no longer an ordered dictionary. And like this, we could, at times, it's easier to access and set certain specific values inside a normal dictionary than inside an ordered dictionary. If we wanted to, in this case, access, for example, in our user FoxyFi, the age, and just return the age, we can just delete this and recomment this in. And in this case, we are returning from our converted dict. So this is the entire dictionary. We want to return from our child user FoxyFi, so our child FoxyFi here, the age, the value of age. So when we execute this, it will return us 32. The same we could do if we wanted, instead of age, bio, and it would return us the bio of FoxyFi. And this is a quick introduction to Firebase. So you have seen how to create a new Firebase database from scratch, how to set it up in Python just using Colab without having to install anything in your machine, how to authenticate, how to set rules in your database, how to create new children, set new values to those children, alter values in those children, and remove certain children from the database. How to access them, how to convert them to dictionary, how to use the verification email methodology from Firebase, which is very useful, how to use the reset password method from the Firebase database, and how to refresh tokens, access account information when an account is created, etc. So this is a lot of stuff that usually I personally in FoxyFi.cc store in the session cookie whenever a user logs in, so that it makes it more easy to access, for example, his email or his username and things like that, to set specific traits, etc. But if you want to have a bit more information, you could always visit this GitHub here from Pyrebase, from this regime, which is quite clear and comprehensive. It shows you most of these methods that we use, or pretty much all of these methods that we used. So how to set up the Firebase, how to instantiate the database, the auth methodology, and you can actually also use storage, which we haven't seen here in this specific showcase. But what you could do here is, in spite of on the side of the real-time database, you also have the storage space. And in here, you could set up storage space and add rules as well, just as with the real-time database. And you could store physical files in here. So you could have a PDF generator that would store PDFs here, And if you have some sort of an invoice application built in Python as a web application in this case, you could have users download certain types of invoices from their accounts based on who the username it belongs to, or which email it belongs to, etc. Stuff that would be stored directly here. You can upload images, you can upload data files, Excel files, etc. All kinds of stuff you can upload into here and download. And that is described by the author of this Pyrebase little documentation here in his page, on his GitHub page as well. How to access files, how to store files, etc. As you can see, authentication, he walks us through that. Token expiry, because they last an hour. Custom tokens, that's something that we haven't seen, but it's also something you could do. How to manage users, so how to create a new user, send a verification email, a password reset, get account information, refresh a token, etc. Access the database, save data, alter data, remove data. I invite you to read through this because it's very comprehensive and it's quite easy to understand. And if you add some of the stuff that was not done to whatever is shown in our showcase here, you can do quite a few more things with this database, which is very interesting. So if there's any feedback you'd like to give, please leave it in the comment section below. Or if there is something specific that you would like to see, you can also comment that. I will try my best to make a video on that as quickly as possible as well. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to also leave a comment or to just reach out to me directly on social media, on Instagram or LinkedIn. If you like this video, please share it. If you know somebody wants to learn Python, learn this stuff, and you believe it's useful for them, share the video. Don't forget to subscribe. It also helps me a lot to increase that subscriber count and the algorithm for the videos that I release. If you want to be notified of whenever I release a new video, you can also click that notification bell. And I thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you on the next one. See ya.